Hi everyone, welcome, and yeah, congrats if you're here on time. So we've got a fairly short 30-minute session today on how to audit structured data with Sitebulb. So I'm just going to get started, and hopefully by the time we've kind of gone through our introduction, everyone else has joined us. So my name is Miruna. I am the customer support and specialist here at Sitebulb. So if you've ever submitted a support ticket, you've probably dealt with me in recent months. We've also got Patrick in the background. He'll be probably in the chat and helping us with any Q&A questions at the end. In terms of today's session, our aim is to kind of go through how to set up successful structured data audits and, more importantly, understanding and analyzing the structured data report. We do have a Q&A tab at the very top on your right next to the chat. So if you do have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the Q&A tab and that will help us see them. And you can also upvote, I believe, other people's questions. So if someone has already asked something that you're wondering, then do use that feature and it will help us answer the most common questions. Finally, there we go. I just wanted to kind of point you out to a couple of resources that you might find useful. So on one hand, we've got our help center, which you can access through the tool. I will show you that in a second. But you can also access it at support.sitebulb.com. And you can also stay up to date with future training in our product training page on our website. We've got a few things coming up. On the 2nd of April, we've got our Advanced Sitebulb Training webinar, which will be another training session like this one. And we'll specifically look at more advanced kind of audit settings and ways of delving deeper into the data with Sitebulb. So yeah, check those out if you're interested. I'm going to jump straight into our demonstration now and show you the structured data report. So this is a completed audit for Sitebulb. I'm looking specifically here at Sitebulb Cloud. So I'm using Sitebulb in the browser, but it will look the same if you're using Sitebulb on desktop. I will zoom in for you because I do believe this may be quite small. If you are having trouble seeing the data on my screen, there is a full screen button again on the top right-hand side of your screen, so that should help with sizing. Okay, so this is a completed audit. I'm going to jump into structured data report and kind of talk you through what we have here. When this report is enabled, Sitebulb collects structured data and validates it against schema.org and Google's search feature guidelines, which help determine the eligibility of that schema for rich results. The report then is specifically focused on search features, so that focuses only on the structured data supported by Google. Anywhere you see search feature, that's what we're referring to. And all of those are validated against Google specification and guidelines. On the other hand, we have schema, so that looks at all of the structured data found on your site, and the validation follows the technical specifications that the schema.org vocabulary lays out. I'm going to kind of talk you through everything that you can see in this report. And then after I've done that, I'll show you some examples of specifically how to analyze this data to gain insights. So like every Sitebulb report, you've got an overview that has this kind of visual graphs that give you key data points. So there's 6 of these graphs on your overview. At the very top, you've got this search features and schema coverage. So how many of the URLs on your website do or do not have search feature compatible structured data, and how many of them have schema or structured data at all. If you scroll down, you've got your URL validation. So this checks that all of the search features or structured data that are found on each URL are valid at that URL level. So if there's a single search feature that fails validation or a single piece of structured data that fails validation, then the URL will fail. And finally, at the bottom of your report, you've got your schema feature validation. So that's validation for every single search feature across the site, and schema entity validation, which again is validation for all of the entities found across the site. At the very top of the report, again, this follows the same structure as most of your Sitebulb reports. You've got a number of tabs that kind of allow you to dig deeper into this data, and they're essentially different ways of grouping the data. So I'm going to talk you through them. Right. Actually, it's going to jump into a different report just because this is a bit more rich in terms of errors and warnings, just so you see how that looks. I'll talk you through it here. Okay, so when we look at search features or the search feature tabs, essentially what we have here is all of the Google structured data features that Sitebulb has found, and the data is grouped by search feature type. Now, this is probably a tab that you'll be quite interested in when it comes to doing your SEO, technical SEO analysis. This is where the structured data on your website comes into play with those rich results that we're probably trying to achieve in order to have better visibility in searches. Any errors or warnings that are corresponding to each of these search features are essentially aggregated here, and you will see them marked up. So if one of these search features has warnings, you will see the warnings tabs, and if it has warnings or and errors or just errors, you will see the See Errors tab. I will show you an example of that in just a second. But before that, I'm going to move on to the rest of the tabs. So the Schema tab. This is all of the schema entities found on the website, again, grouped by type. And just like in the previous tab, you have your errors flagged up here. Just like in the other tab, you've got the number of URLs that have each of these types of structured data. Any URLs that do not have this data, you've got the number of errors as well as instances and the number of entities found for each of these structured data types. Okay, the next thing we want to look at is the Entity Explorer. So for this one, actually, I'm going to move back to the Sitebulb report just because of how this structured data is set up on this website. We have a little bit of richer data. So in terms of the Entity Explorer, this is a list of every entity found on the site. You've got the corresponding URL for each of these entities. I'm just going to scroll so you can see. You've also got the ID, if there is an ID set or unfound. You've got the schema type and the corresponding search feature, if that is relevant to it. And this tab is particularly relevant, I think, based on the conversation we've had. If you have attended our previous webinars, we've had a couple of webinars now on structured data. Earlier this month, we talked to Jarno, Crystal, and Dave on structured data in the age of AI. And one thing that kind of came out of that conversation is this idea that in today's search landscape, search engines do have a solid understanding of your pages based on their language processing system. However, schema is particularly valuable when it comes to differentiating these different entities and establishing the relationship between them. So in the context of our structured data report, Sitebulb analyzes your schema, identifies every single entity found on your site, and also provides you with kind of their unique identifiers and all this related data to kind of allow you to analyze what's going on here and possibly found opportunities for improvement. Finally, we've got our Property Explorer. So this is every property found throughout your structured data. Again, you've got the name column and the type and ID, like you see here, attributes are also included here. They do contextualize what the entities, what entity the properties listed belong to. You've got the corresponding URL and the schema type that each of these properties correspond to, and you've also got the relevant search feature where appropriate. In the value column, obviously, you've got the value of each of these properties. So that will become relevant in a second when I show you some examples on how you can analyze this data. Now, what I wanted to do is go back to our search feature and schema tabs and talk you through some examples of analyzing these errors and warnings. So let's go here. Okay. So on this particular website, Sitebulb has identified errors and warnings. Obviously, like I've said, is checking this against Google's guidelines. And this is a particularly relevant view because you are seeing the data aggregated. So if I look at example of this video search feature here, Sitebulb has identified that it has errors, and I can open that up. And what I see is that Sitebulb is listing one error and two warnings that have been found for this structured data, for this search feature specifically. And you will see the number of URLs affected by each of these warnings and errors here. You also see the total number of warnings and errors. So obviously in the case of this error where the search feature is missing a required property, and that is affecting every single one of these URLs that have the errors. And in the case of this warning of missing recommended properties, there are actually several of those recommended properties missing. So although 195 URLs are affected, there are way more warnings than that because each of these URL has several warnings pertaining to them. What you can do from here is click the View button to jump straight into the Property Explorer, into a filtered view of all of those errors and therefore the corresponding URLs. So this is a great way of analyzing the data and finding all of the affected URLs efficiently. Again, obviously, if you're doing your auditing search features, and the ability to kind of gain those rich results is something that you might be quite interested in. The next thing we're going to look at is the same feature in the schema tab. So in this case, we have a recipe structured data that has errors. So again, I can open that up and see all of the errors that Sitebulb has recognized. I can click View to once again jump into a filtered list in the Property Explorer that shows me exactly which URLs are affected. And from here, anytime you are in a URL list, across Sitebulb generally, but we're going to focus on this example here, you often have these buttons that give you further information about the specific URL. So in this case, I can click the blue Structured Data button, and this is essentially taking me into the URL details view. You can see that I have all my reports on the left-hand side here, and it's taking me specifically to the structured data report. And here I can see the search features that Sitebulb has found for this URL and all of the schema. And I can jump into that recipe schema and see the error in context. So that's something you can do anytime you have one of these errors. And that's kind of the process that you would follow. So you would go for this aggregated data view to your URL list. And then if you want to explore further, you can go URL by URL and see the specific data for each of them. Okay, so the warnings and errors that you can see here, if you wanted more information about them, this is where that Help Center that I mentioned before comes into play. So if you click your Help and Support button at the top of the screen and you jump into the Help menu, you can essentially search our Help Center within the tool. So I can look up our Google Search Features Validation doc. There we go. And this allows me to open this reference doc, which lists the errors and warnings as I will be flagging. In the tool, you have a small description of the error, and you can kind of use that in tandem with the data that you're analyzing within the tool. A few more things to note about this view is that you have the option, if you wanted to analyze the data outside of Sitebulb. So on one hand, anywhere in this report, you can export a summary of your structured data. So this will produce a Google Sheet or CSV file that looks like this. But you can see this is essentially all of those key metrics of your overview and then your search features and schema tabs. So you've got, again, your entities, your instances, the URL with and without these search features, and any errors and warnings. It's what it says on the tin. It's a summary of your data. If you wanted to, if you wanted to go a bit deeper and again export more specific data, you can choose to export the data from here. So use these export buttons to take this specific search feature or schema data outside of Sitebulb through CSV or Google Sheets. So those are some ways of kind of analyzing the data within the tool or outside the tool. However, there are some benefits to analyzing the data within the tool. So I'm going to jump now into the Property Explorer. I'm going to clear that filter so I can see all of the data. Actually, I'm going to do it on this audit. So this is an e-commerce website, a nice coffee roaster and seller. They have loads of products. And all of those products have implemented product structure data. So I thought it would be a good example to show you how this might look in action if you wanted to analyze your data directly through Sitebulb. So I'm in my Property Explorer tab, and I know that in this case, some of the products on this site, in fact, a lot of the products in this site have different variants. So you might buy the same product in different quantities, in different types of grind, and they all come at different price points. Now, knowing that, I might want to first find all of the products that have the offer schema type. So in order to do that, I can use the advanced filter option. So I'm going to go to my advanced filter. I'm going to select schema type and add in here offer. So I'll apply that filter. And now I've got a list of all of my products that have the offer schema type. So this is essentially going to be a list of all of my product variants. If you look in the URL column, you can see that the same product is going to be listed several times because Sitebulb is giving me each of the properties for the offer schema type. And I can see the listed variant URL, I can see availability, price, price currency, etc., as well as the URL, which is obviously that product variant that I'm referring to. Now, say if I wanted to filter this list further and only see the variant URL and the price, for example, I can use the advanced filter to kind of further group my filtering. So I can add a group here and then use name, which in this case, it's referring to the name of the properties in my list. So let's do name contains URL, add a rule for name equals price. And then I'm going to change this to or. There we go. So now I've got all of the products that have variants, that have this offer structure data, and their price and their variant URL. So obviously you can apply this in many different ways, but this is quite a powerful way of filtering and analyzing the data within the tool. And once again, like with any Sitebulb URL list, you can choose to export the data from here. At this point, if you create a Google Sheets or CSV export, you will be exporting the filtered view of this data. So I believe that's all I wanted to show you in terms of the audit's data itself. Now we're going to just briefly go to how to set this audit up. I'm going to move to the project view and just show you how this audit is set up. So because I set up this project as kind of like an example, it's a fairly plain setup. But essentially, all you need to do in order to for Sitebulb to create the structured data report that we just looked at is to enable your structured data report in Audit settings. The only caveat that we might have with this is to pay attention to the crawler type. So at the point of setting up your audit, obviously you might want to know what your goals are and how your website is set up. But it is important to note that if your website uses JavaScript to load in structured data markup, you will need to select the Chrome crawler in order to make sure that Sitebulb renders JavaScript and correctly audits your website. For the most part, with the HTML crawler, you probably will be able to crawl most websites, but do keep that in mind. If your website uses JavaScript, you need to use the Chrome crawler. Other than that, the only other thing that you might kind of want to think about is what reports you enable and you don't enable. Obviously, you could enable your structured data report for a complete audit of the site, or you might want to create kind of like a separate project where you're auditing your structured data in a specific section of your site. So you could use things like the inclusion and exclusion rules to separate and just crawl, say, like the product section of your website and get that structured data that way. Yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to cover, which does mean that we have about 8-9 minutes to cover any questions if you have them. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now, and hopefully Patrick can help us if there have been any questions. Great, thank you, Patrick. Is there a way to generate schema code that has an error warning so we could copy it and make edits to fix it? Right, so are you referring to extracting the specific schema from the audit? I don't think that's an option. Do correct me if I'm wrong about this, Patrick. But what you can do, obviously, is see the schema, like the entities and the properties in Sitebulb, but you can't see the code itself within Sitebulb. Any other questions? Okay, yeah. So Patrick mentions this structured data testing tool. So let me just reshare my screen and find a product here, and I'll show you that. Okay. So I'll leave that to load, but essentially you've got the structured data checker at the very top of your screen here, and you can run an audit through that. It might take a while because this website was quite slow when I initially audited it. There we go. And then you can look at the HTML tab from here and possibly achieve what you were asking about, Jeff. Are there any other questions, Patrick? No more questions. Awesome. Well, that was an efficient session. Like I said, if you do have any further questions, I encourage you to use the Help Center. We're constantly adding new documentation on there. And if you don't manage to find an answer for your question, you can contact us, send us a message through the tool, and I'll probably pick that up and answer it for you. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us, and check out our other training sessions. Thank you.